The reading of this very short essay is dedicated to everybody who collects a government paycheck, everybody who salutes the American flag, everybody who relies upon the Constitution, everybody who stands up for the national anthem. The Criminality of the State. That's the title of this essay. It's written by Albert J. Nock. First appeared in the American Mercury in March of 1939. It's very short. As I read it, just think of what this gentleman would say in 2018 about the further atrocities committed not only around the world, but specifically by the divided police states of what's known as America. As well as I can judge, the general attitude of Americans who are at all interested in foreign affairs is one of astonishment, coupled with distaste, displeasure, or horror, according to the individual observer's capacity for emotional excitement. Perhaps I ought to shade this statement a little in order to keep on the safe side and say that this is the most generally expressed attitude. All our institutional voices, the press, pulpit, forum, are pitched to the note of amazed indignation at one or another phrase of the current goings-on in Europe and Asia. This leads me to believe that our people generally are viewing with wonder as well as repugnance certain conspicuous actions of various foreign states. For instance, the barbarous behavior of the German state towards some of its own citizens, the merciless despotism of the Soviet Russian state, the ruthless imperialism of the Italian state, the betrayal of Czechoslovakia by the British and French states, the savagery of the Japanese state, the brutishness of the Chinese state's mercenaries, and so on, here or there, all over the globe. This sort of thing is showing itself to be against our people's grain, and they are speaking out about it in wrathful surprise. I am cordially with them on every point but one. I am with them in repugnance, horror, indignation, disgust, but not in astonishment. The history of the state being what it is, and its testimony being as invariable and eloquent as it is, I am obliged to say that the naive tone of surprise herewith our people complain of these matters strikes me as a pretty sad reflection on their intelligence. Suppose someone were impolite enough to ask the gruff question, "What do you expect?" What rational answer could they give? I know of none. Polite or impolite, that is just the question which ought to be put every time a story of state villainy appears in the news. It ought to be thrown at our public day after day from every newspaper, periodical, lecture platform, and radio station in the land. And it ought to be backed up by a simple appeal to history, a simple invitation to look at the record. The British state has sold the Czech state down the river by a despicable trick. Very well, be as disgusted and angry as you like, but don't be astonished. What would you expect? Just take a look at the British state's record. The German state is persecuting great masses of its people. The Russian state is holding a purge. The Italian state is grabbing territory. The Japanese state is buccaneering all along the Asiatic coast. Horrible, yes, but for heaven's sakes, don't lose your head over it. For what would you expect? Look at the record. This is how every public presentation of these facts ought to run if Americans are ever going to grow up into an adult attitude towards them. Also, in order to keep down the great American sin of self-righteousness, every public presentation ought to draw the deadly parallel with the record of the American state. The German state is persecuting a minority, just as the American state did after 1776. The Italian state breaks into Ethiopia, just as the American state broke into Mexico. The Japanese state kills off the Manchurian tribes in wholesale lots, just as the American state did the Indian tribes. The British state practices large-scale carpetbaggery, like the American state after 1864. The imperialist French state massacres native civilians on their own soil, as the American state did in pursuit of its imperialistic policies in the Pacific. and so on. In this way, perhaps our people might get into their heads some glimmering of the fact that the state's criminality is nothing new and nothing to be wondered at. It began when the first predatory group of men clustered together and formed the state, and it will continue as long as the state exists in the world. Because the state is fundamentally an antisocial institution, fundamentally criminal. The idea that the state originated to serve any kind of social purpose is completely unhistorical. It originated in conquest and confiscation, that is to say, in crime. It originated for the purpose of maintaining the division of society into an owning and exploiting class and a propertyless dependent class, that is, for a criminal purpose. No state known to history originated in any other manner or for any other purpose. Like all predatory or parasitic institutions, its first instinct is that of self-preservation. All its enterprises are directed first toward preserving its own life and second towards increasing its own power and enlarging the scope of its own activity. For the sake of this, it will, and regularly does, commit any crime which circumstances make expedient. In the last analysis, what is the German, Italian, French, or British state now actually doing? It is ruining its own people in order to preserve itself, to enhance its own power and prestige, and extend its own authority, and the American state is doing the same to the utmost of its opportunities. What then is a little matter, like a treaty to the French or British state, merely a scrap of paper? Bethmann Hollweg described it exactly. Why be astonished when the German or Russian state murders its citizens? The American state would do the same thing under the same circumstances. In fact, 80 years ago, it did murder a great many of them for no other crime in the world, but that they did not wish to live under its rule any longer. And if that is a crime, then the colonists led by George Washington were hardened criminals, and the 4th of July is nothing but a cutthroat's holiday. The weaker the state is, the less power it has to commit crime. Where in Europe today does the state have the best criminal record? Where it is the weakest? In Switzerland, Holland, Denmark, Norway, Luxembourg, Sweden, Monaco, Andorra. Yet when the Dutch state, for instance, was strong, its criminality was appalling. In Java it massacred 9,000 persons in one morning, which is considerably ahead of Hitler's record or Stalin's. It would not do the like today, for it could not. The Dutch people do not give it that much power, and would not stand for such conduct. When the Swedish state was a great empire, its record, say from 1660 to 1670, was fearful. What does all this mean? But if you do not want the state to act like a criminal, you must disarm it as you would a criminal. You must keep it weak. The state will always be criminal in proportion to its strength. A weak state will always be as criminal as it can be, or dare be, but if it is kept down to the proper limit of weakness, which, by the way, is a vast deal lower limit than people are led to believe, its criminality may be safely got on with. So it strikes me that instead of sweating blood over the iniquity of foreign states, my fellow citizens would do a great deal better by themselves to make sure the American state is not strong enough to carry out the like iniquities here. The stronger the American state is allowed to grow, the higher its record of criminality will grow, according to its opportunities and temptations. If then, instead of devoting energy, time, and money to warding off wholly imaginary and fanciful dangers from criminals thousands of miles away, our people turn their patriotic fervor loose on the only source from which danger can proceed, they will be doing their full duty by their country. Two able and sensible American publicists, Isabella Patterson of the New York Herald Tribune and W.J. Cameron of the Ford Motor Company, have lately called our public's attention to the great truth that if you give the state power to do something for you, you give it an exact equivalent of power to do something to you. I wish every editor, publicist, teacher, preacher, and lecturer would keep hammering that truth into American heads until they get it nailed fast there, never to come loose. The state was organized in this country with power to do all kinds of things for the people, and the people in their short-sighted stupidity have been adding to that power ever since. After 1789, John Adams said that so far from being a democracy of a democratic republic, the political organization of the country was that of a, quote, a monarchical republic, or if you will, a limited monarchy, close quote. If all that was true in 1789, and it was true, what is to be said of the American state at the present time, after a century and a half of steady centralization and continuous increments of power? Many now believe that with the rise of the totalitarian state, the world has entered upon a new era of barbarism. It has not. The totalitarian state is only the state. The kind of thing it does is only what the state has always done with unfailing regularity, if it had the power to do it, wherever and whenever its own aggrandizement made that kind of thing expedient. Give any state like power hereafter, and put it in like circumstances, and it will do precisely the same kind of thing. The state will unfailingly aggrandize itself if only it has the power, first at the expense of its own citizens, and then at the expense of anyone else in sight. It has always done so, and always will. The idea that the state is a social institution, and that with a fine, upright man like Mr. Chamberlain at the head of it, or a charming person like Mr. Roosevelt, there can be no question about it being honorably and nobly managed. All this is just so much sticky flypaper. Men in that position usually make a good deal of their honor, and some of them indeed may have some. But the machine they are running will run on rails which are laid only one way, which is from crime to crime. No democratic state practice is nothing more or less than state practice. It does not differ from Marxist state practice, fascist state practice, or any other. Here is the golden rule of sound citizenship, the first and greatest lesson in the study of politics. You get the same order of criminality from any state to which you give power to exercise it, and whatever power you give the state to do things for you carries with it the equivalent power to do things to you. A citizenry which has learned that one short lesson has but little more left to learn. Stripping the American state of the enormous power it has acquired is a full-time job for our citizens, and a stirring one. And if they attend to it properly, they will have no energy to spare for fighting communism, or for hating Hitler, or for worrying about South America or Spain, or for anything whatever except what goes on right here in the United States. And that concludes the article by Albert J. Nock. Again, first appeared in March 1939, right before American involvement in World War II. I would like to add a few of my own personal comments about what's happened since this was written, some 80 years ago almost. You know, he was concerned about a century and a half. Now we're staring at almost a quarter of a millennia of time that the American state has had to, as he says, centralize power and to incrementally increase its own influence, its criminal acts. So, allow me, if I may, to be humble enough to continue upon this man's line of thinking into the events that lay before him in the future that he obviously couldn't be aware of. Let's start with World War II. Everybody has such a notion in their head that, there were good guys and there were bad guys, and we were stopping Hitler and Italy and Japan, and look at all the brutality. I mean, for a lot of people, this is going to be hearing something they already know, so I apologize. But, take a look at how America decided to defeat Germany and Japan. Did they really have to firebomb civilians? They just couldn't stick to military targets? They had to firebomb civilians? And when I say firebomb, I mean quite that. Create an raging inferno throughout towns that just burn and murder everybody, either through, fire or smoke. Just lay waste, just annihilate from the safety of tens of thousands of feet above. Was that necessary? I mean, look at Japan. As much as I detest everything about Japanese culture from World War II, and it's blatantly obvious to anyone how, to say it's psychopathic is a grave understatement. Was it necessary to murder civilians to the extent that they did? They just light the whole place on fire because it's all made out of wood? Well, yeah, of course. Look what they did to China. Rape of Nanking. Look what they did to us in the Pacific. Look how little they value human life and how much they force us to waste, how many of our own. Justified. I'm not going to comment on whether or not a nuclear bomb is justified. I have my own opinions about that. I think it was. However, before that, if you think, America's nothing but good guys and I can watch Saving Private Ryan and feel good, like, everything we did was right and everything they did was wrong, you're sorely mistaken. If you think that freedom won and tyranny lost, you're sorely mistaken. Tyranny wins, no matter who wins the war. Tyranny is there to pick up the pieces, to exploit what it can, and to progress in its criminal ways, its means, its colonialism, or any other expansionism, any form of barbarism you want to call it. He probably saw the inklings of this. He was, this came out in 1939. World War II was over in, 4 or 5 years from then? Relatively. But I guess I'm just hoping to introduce the idea that there is no good guys and bad guys. It's all bad guys. Well, gosh, my uncle, my grandpa were so proud. They served in World War II honorably, and they got these little shiny pieces of metal and little pieces of fabric called ribbons. And man, I'm not trying to crap on or insult the extreme suffering that men, mostly on the ground, and civilians obviously went through. How silly would I be to even suggest such an insult to such suffering? I'm not doing that. I'm saying the belief that this was a just and noble cause, instead of just the people who rule everyone having a spat about, I want to control people this way, no, I want to control people this way, we're competing and we can't control each other's population, we're going to force our populations to go to war so that eventually one of us will be able to control the other people's population. That's all it is. That's all it is. And like he says, you give power to the state to wage war, to murder, to act without accountability, without transparency. You give them the power to do it to you. You give them the power to go to war to this country, to that country, to that country. You just put your own family at war. You put your own friends and relatives who, quote-unquote, serve in the military. You brought a war upon them. Is it necessary? Is it absolutely necessary? How many times has it been absolutely necessary? How many times was it preventable? So that's just World War II. Those are my very simple thoughts on it. I'm sorry I'm not the most sophisticated historian. I'm sure others could do better, but I'm just trying to hit the highlights. All right, if the listener is so inclined, they can go do their own research and investigations as to the specifics. I just want to touch the highlights. Let's move on to Korea. All right, we're, 5 years out from World War II. Korea's technically from 1950 to 1953. And what is the main fear? What is the problem? The people that run, quote-unquote, America are going, oh, we like to rule and flex power over our citizens and exploit and farm human beings, milk them for our own sustainment and power. We like to do it this way, called a democratic republic. You like to do it with communism, collectivism. And we don't like that. We want to be able to control your people the way we want to control people, not the way you want to control people. Because if you win, we're going to be out of power. We're not going to have that. So, it's our business to go into this place called Korea and brainwash our troops into going over there and fighting 5 years after World War II, mind you, to quote-unquote push back the Reds. And boy, this is going to be easy. And look, we've got this awesome General Douglas MacArthur. Look what a hero. He's going to come in here, and this is going to be an easy victory. So for those of you who don't know, because Korea often isn't talked about or researched much, you know, we roll up in there and think, aha, we're the victors of World War II. This is going to be a cakewalk for us. We're just going to push these people right back. All right, because the North had invaded. So we launch a campaign, and we push north. And we push north way past any kind of demarcation line. We were like all the way to the Yalu, which is the northern border between North Korea and China. Like, forget this, we're pushing these Reds all the way back to the Yalu. F all of Korea, we're going to unite it under our form of governance. And yay for us. This is going to be easy. So they go in there and, well, let me back up. I mean, first North Korea had made the push, and what were we seeing? Russian weapons and Russian tanks. So North Korea was getting help from Russia, right? We come in, we push them back, we push them back. We retake Seoul, we push all the way through Pyongyang, we're pushing all the way, we get to a place called Chosin Reservoir. And then China decides to, it had decided earlier, obviously, to involve itself, but at Chosin Reservoir was where the Chinese forces finally, you know, after all the preparation, caught up to ours. And what happened? What happened? We got our butt kicked. That's what happened. On the west side of that reservoir, on the east side of that reservoir, and on the south side of that reservoir, and a couple of places in between, we got our ass kicked, handed to us. Now, it doesn't matter that we killed more of them. They forced American forces out. Whether it's physically or politically, they forced American forces out. And they almost annihilated. We're talking companies, battalions, even a division. Just tried to wipe it out, down to the last man, right? All the while, this is going on for, what, 2 more years. There's freezing cold winters. People are freezing their limbs. They're not, you know, they're dying from bullets, but they're dying from freezing to death as well. We had our asses handed to us. We're in full retreat, or as the American forces like to call it, attacking to the south. And we're getting nailed all along the way. Help's trying to come. Oh, we can't help the help. Half of them get blasted out of existence. They just, gosh, we can't even dig for foxholes, so let's just stack up frozen bodies. I mean, the amount of hell, I can't even imagine, obviously. I can't even imagine it, the reality of it. But, you know, when we go do this to other people, what do you think we do to our own troops? And then the troops that live and come back, those who don't have a problem with PTSD, what do you think? How are they changed? And how do they take that change and infect our society with it? Do you think the government says, hey man, I know you just went to war for us. Let me put you in a very expensive psychological counseling program, complete with whatever methods and the best cutting leading edge technologies we've got to make sure you come back home a productive and socially, psychologically healthy human being. No, absolutely, obviously they don't do that. They just suck it up, back to work you go. And this comes home to us. I mean, this is obvious to anyone. We've been in a state of war since 9/11. It's now 2018, and if you think those troops that have been banging in doors and bombing and not considering themselves with the logical or ethical consequences of their actions don't come home and fuck this place up for us, you're living in La La Land. So we basically get kicked the hell off the Korean Peninsula and basically go, okay, here's what we're going to do. We got to just draw a line and retreat and call it fair. We'll just make this line and then leave it up to the South Koreans, and if they lose it, then they lose it. But hey, at least we're going to be able to get out of here, because we don't have the troops, we don't have the money, we don't have the support to provide enough forces to defeat China, this close to China. We are getting our ass handed to us, and Mao just doesn't give anything about his own people. He's just throwing them at us in wave after wave, much like Japan did. So we call that a stalemate, and leave Korea in complete and total defeat. Alright, they draw the line, and the UN has never been back, and it's been a obvious war zone ever since. Going on, what, 60, 70 years now? Good lord. Way to go, state, right? Vietnam. Do I really need to say anything about Vietnam? Right? Similar circumstance, different place. And the... people know enough about Vietnam to know that we should never have been there, that this threat of communism is no more a threat to us than our own government at home. And if you think you're going to improve your society, your family, or take care of you and yours by going overseas to fight someone, you're sorely mistaken. The fight is best fought here against your own government, because they're all the same. They are all ultimately the same. They do whatever they can get away with, and they can get away with whatever the people allow them to get away with or empower them to get away with. And if your population is dumb as a post, you can expect the same at the top, but converted into, of course, barbaric cruelty, domestic terrorism, murder, and all manner of atrocities and crimes below that, if you want to call it that. I don't even know what to say about Vietnam as it relates to this article. I don't even know what to say. You can go, 52, 58, 50 some odd thousand American deaths. What about all those who lived, came home? They get jobs, They become fathers, They become police. They enter government. They enter business. And obviously we're in a culture where they don't talk about it, and they're weak to need help for it. So they just do the best they can, and if the best they can is ruined, if they have been ruined, if they have developed psychopathologies, if they are now antisocial, if their minds have been infected and they've been feeding dysfunctional patterns of behavior, and neural networks form in their brains that solidify these patterns. You're not just up against a human being when you confront them on some random day in some random year about their atrocities. You're confronting the totality of the history that made them the way they are. There's no sense in talking logic or ethics to a judge. They're too far gone. They've willingly allowed their lives to be okay with lying. And when you do that for a long period of time, you become what you never thought you could be or wanted to be originally. And you probably become unrecognizable to yourself. Because after all, you're under the illusion that you're protecting and serving and doing good justice to society. Justifying that very nice paycheck. Very nice status, very nice power, flex. The Cold War, right? Moving on to the Cold War. I mean, there's an argument to be made that, gosh, the only reason why the nukes never dropped big picture is because what good is it to not only annihilate every asset that you'd normally want to pillage and claim as a victor of a war, but to make it radioactive for decades or centuries? That doesn't do anybody any good. Yeah, it just satisfies your little ego, but you're gonna possibly risk an overthrow. Alright, you're probably gonna go down in history, you and yours, as the worst that's ever been. And you don't get to really benefit from it. If you nuke America or you nuke Russia into a wasteland, you go down as that guy. And what did you gain? I never really felt a whole lot of fear about, oh, they're just going to nuke everybody. Now, a bigger threat to me would be like if they developed enough, capable biological weapons, chemical weapons, electronic weapons like electromagnetic pulses, things that could remove all human beings from the area but preserve all the assets and the treasure, the land, right? I mean, looking forward, and I know people might think I'm a little bit odd about this, but again, even head gangster Vladimir Putin says that World War III will be fought with drones, so I'll say, drones. Why launch nukes if you have drones? Just looking forward into the future. Putin says that it'll be our drones against their drones. Whoever has the drones at the end will win because humans are no match for drones. That's far more of a realistic possibility to fear than all-out nuclear winter because of the way these people operate at the very, 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 very top. But the Cold War, how much treasure was wasted, how many families were separated, how much unnecessary suffering and grief was caused by the Red Scare. Ooh, communism. They want to farm their humans a different way than we want to farm ours. Ooh, bad. And because most people are children who never grow up, never take responsibility for either their own actions or their own education or lack thereof, we fall for it collectively. Well, not everybody. Not people like Albert J. Nock, obviously. Gulf War I. Iraq invades Kuwait. Oh, no. I actually heard somebody who's got more than half a marble rolling around upstairs say that we never went to war for oil. And he was limiting his perspective to what we could consume. He wasn't thinking at all about their concerns for letting oil fall into the hands of their enemies, because, as we all know, oil makes war machines go. Get what I'm saying? Oil enables the production of everything that builds militaries and makes them function and do what they do, which is murder indiscriminately, just about. Gulf War I, nothing but oil. Oh, we can't allow a country to go invade another sovereign country. I mean, it happens all the time. How many times do we get involved? Never, unless there's something in it for us, and big time, which was oil. Just a reason to get involved, to control regionally. Hey, maybe we're not getting it all at our best rate we want, but by God, we're going to prevent you all from getting it. An increasingly irrelevant resource. So we kick butt and then we get out. What happens? How do we treat our vets time and time again? How do we treat our vets that come home and have problems adapting to society again? I mean, gosh. Anybody who even joins the military, really, you're a fucking idiot. Sorry for my language, but you're a fucking idiot. Not only are you supporting the destruction of your society, but you're supporting the destruction of yourself. It's a self-destructive suicide to join the military. Just look at how they treat people who get out. They throw them away. You're a disposable razor. The second you start to dull, you're done. I mean, don't take my word for it. Go talk to the nearest, closest ex-military member you know of and who had any problems with any kind of PTSD, anything, and ask them how they were handled. Any kind of injury, maybe not just PTSD, maybe just physical injury, disability. When it comes to money especially, right? Never mind psychological counseling. You know, pick your sand out of your clit and push. Was a saying, right? Gulf War II. You know, how can you say anything else to radical fundamentalist Islamic or any other evil collection of twisted and I don't even know the words, depraved beings, lost all humanity, such as ISIS, right? These people who, Allahu Akbar, blow people up indiscriminately, even if they were driven there. How can you have any other opinion than that they've won? See, they've been blown to smithereens, annihilated into having to completely reform different factions or groups, shipped off to prisons. 90% of those we attempt to kill actually kill civilians instead. Drone strikes. Even if we have quote-unquote won, I'm like, oh, now we're going to negotiate a peace in Afghanistan and Iraq and get out. Even if, by statistics, you consider the American might to have won as an American quote-unquote citizen, as they claim, I say we have lost. I say we have ultimately lost and that they have ultimately won. Because they're not going away. You can look at the history of these places. They're not going away. They're just not. You cut the head off one, you create two more. It's impossible. But the people that we authorize, that we empower to go bang in the doors, to go launch the bombs, to go invade cities, to go drop bombs from drones, jets, all of the taxes that you pay, the stolen money, the theft, the treasury that enables that insane military spending budget, that comes back to haunt us. Those soldiers who committed those atrocities and got medals and reward and praise for it, who didn't fall off the bandwagon of Normalville and go PTSD crazy, remember how many suicides per day? Find themselves psychologically healthy and functional after having endured such experiences as the perpetrator, as the criminal, as the murderer, right? Come home and get employed. They date your sister. They get into government. Quite a many of them get into the police force. I say we have lost. I say there are no good men in the police. I say there are no good men or women at the top of the political power structure. I say there are no good prosecutors that prosecute nonviolent victimless criminal charges. I say there are no good judges. It is wholly corrupted. Imagine it what you will, whether an army that has come over and conquered, and that's just their side dominating the rest of us, or whether they are one of us that has become a collaborator with the occupation. It matters not. They are too far gone. It is what it is. There is no appealing to their humanity. There is no hope that they'll turn it all around. There is no, oh, after the government checks fail, oh, then they're going to be like, gosh, I'm so sorry, I was just caught up in it. I was just obeying orders and, feel sorry for me. Oh, how could I have known? Okay, we'll do it this new way. Okay, I'm sorry. If you wave the flag, if you fly it, you support the state in all its forms, in all the places it comes from, in all the barbarism it's inflicted. That American flag is a symbol of murder, theft, violence, rape, manipulation, lies, and deceit. The national anthem, a joke. You want to stand for a judge or put your hand over your heart or pledge your allegiance to a piece of fabric, you go right ahead. But know what you're doing at least. Because if you know and you still do it, you're a coward. You're a spineless waste of humanity, and the world and society would be better off if you ceased to exist. Your genes should not propagate. If you feel the same way, you're not going to find it a popular opinion, and sometimes you've got to dig back into authors of the past to find those like you. And by those like me, I'm just saying someone who's willing to look at truth, irrefutable, non-controversial truth, driven by factual evidence, and apply it to all aspects of your life. Not just the convenient ones, not just the comfortable ones, not just the ones that your parents and your grandparents are okay with. all of them. Unless you apply a complete standard of truth to everything you claim to believe in, you're a fool. Alright, now let me get off my high horse for a second to lastly summarize by explaining exactly how I feel the internet's influence and live streaming technology has affected this entire pattern of humanity, let's call it. So being able to live stream out of your phone in your pocket brings to every human the ability to capture irrefutable reality. Jury convincing, public convincing reality. They know this. They know they've always prospered on the word of the cop and the prosecutors and the judge winning over the word of a quote-unquote complainant. Right? But that's no longer the case. The reason why Leon Valley and all these other places have problems with our cameras is because they know how their power has been maintained up until this point, and they know that this power of live streaming technology is the biggest threat to it they've ever seen. If you allow people to capture live streaming reality, truth, you can't get away with what you used to be able to get away with. Anyway, those are some of my thoughts, and that's all I have to say about it. Thanks for listening.